So FeiyuTech just came out with their AK4500 gimbal, which I have right here. And it's a seriously full-featured, high-payload, super flexible gimbal. What's even better is that it fits into their existing ecosystem. So if you already have the AK4000, which I have right here, or their ring grip, for example, the AK4500 is going to feel right at home. So with such similar designs and names that literally only differ by one number, what are the differences in these two gimbals and what features will you get with both of them? Today we're going to talk about that and just what makes a good gimbal in general. So let's get into it. Hey, I'm Scott and welcome to the channel where I do lots of unboxings, reviews, tips, tricks, and just anything photo or video related. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and don't forget the little bell to get notifications when new content is uploaded. So both of these gimbals have a ton of functions built into them and they have tons of flexibility in how you use them physically as well. And as far as I can tell, all of that works just fine. There's really nothing special to report here that you can't just read on a spec sheet. So what I want to focus on in this video today is breaking it into two parts. I'll talk about what I think are the best features for any gimbal, and I'll talk about exactly what's different between these two models so that way you can get a better idea of which one may be a better fit for you. The number one question I get with gimbal reviews is, will this gimbal stabilize my blah blah blah, or which one stabilizes my footage better, this gimbal or that gimbal? And honestly, I think that's looking at it all wrong. Stick with me because I think there are a couple of huge factors that really play into getting good footage that people often overlook. Both of these gimbals will do a great job at actually stabilizing your footage as long as your camera and lens combination are within the payload limit, and of course as long as physically they're not anything crazy that you have this small little lightweight camera on a super long lens that physically will be hard to get balanced. Do make sure that your camera is properly balanced before you turn the camera on. Don't forget the pan axis. That's the number one place where people accidentally make mistakes. Make sure that the motor strength on your gimbal is set to the appropriate level so that way you don't have too much power and end up with unwanted shakes from just an overactive motor. With both of these gimbals there is also an auto mode to set that motor strength automatically, and I've been using that and it's worked really great for me. So that makes it a lot faster and easier, especially if you're going between different camera setups. Also, of course, you have to take care of your own technique with any gimbal and don't expect miracles because they're not going to do that. For example, you're not going to get correction for up and down motion with either of these gimbals or any gimbal of this style because there's no axis to correct for that. Remember all that and voila, you should get just as stable and smooth footage as any other gimbal in this price bracket. But what's really key is how a gimbal reacts to your movements and how much control you have over how it reacts. It's honestly a mixed bag with these two, but for the most part, they get the job done pretty well. Being able to dial in exactly how reactive your gimbal is really important. With the AK4000, you get 3 preset levels of reactiveness, I guess you could call it, for different situations, and it helps, but honestly, I would like to have a little bit more control. For me, the thing that I'm looking for most is a kind of slow reactiveness, something that's not quite so overactive, I guess, if you want to say it that way. And for me, the 3 modes, or the slowest of the 3 modes in the AK4000, just don't quite cut it. You can absolutely still get great footage, but you do have to be a little bit more conscious and a little bit more careful of your own movement. Not being able to dial that back quite as much as I want just makes it a little bit easier to accidentally have some really sudden jerky movement, and just, in your footage is gonna be like saying, hey, I'm on a gimbal. The AK4500 does take it a step further though, with an extra mode to custom set your reaction speed and the dead zone. I actually really like having both options, presets for when you're in a rush and custom modes for when you have time to really dial it in exactly how you want. But I do still wish that you could dial both of these settings back just a little bit further. Even though you do have custom control over it, the limit on the low end is still a little bit high for my taste. It definitely does do a better job though, so it's awesome to see that they did upgrade that with the AK4500. By the way, dead zone is a very important function to have control over. The dead zone is just the area that you can move the gimbal before it starts reacting. So obviously, human hands are not perfect. That's the reason why we have gimbals. So having that dead zone set so that way your little tiny movements don't translate into movements in your footage just makes it a lot easier to make sure all of your movements are very deliberate and not accidental. Being able to adjust it to a custom setting means that whether you're walking a little bit more carefully or running where you can't control your movements quite as much, you can dial that in to react exactly how you want it in that situation. So you have enough control, but not so much control that it's going to react to every little movement that you accidentally make. Anyway, building on that topic of how gimbals react to your movement, there are basically two groups of gimbals here. With one group, as you tilt the gimbal forward, it will switch between the bottom motor controlling your pan movement and the rear motor, which becomes on the top as you tilt it out, controlling your pan movement very, very suddenly. What that means is that if you have the gimbal tilted forward or even downward a little bit, as you tilt it up, if you have the handle accidentally twisted just a little bit, when the motor switch, it's going to suddenly jerk over to line up with the way that you have the gimbal pointed. It kills your take and it makes it very tricky to get nice and smooth tilt and pan type movements, and honestly it's just kind of annoying. Luckily, the AK4500 and AK4000 both fall into the second group, which is a group that switches between those motors in a much smoother way. Of course, as you tilt up or tilt down, they will still switch which motor controls that pan movement, but it just does it so much smoother, and it means that it doesn't ruin your take. You can either react to it a little bit easier, or you can just go with it and use that movement in a much smoother way that doesn't really show up in your footage. For me, this can sometimes make or break a gimbal, so I'm really happy to see that both of these do very well. The next thing that's most important for me in a gimbal is the ability to fine tune it, to adjust the motor strength, to change your follow modes, things like that quickly and easily without the need for an app. For the most part, both of these gimbals do really, really well here with a touchscreen that's really simple and easy to use, and it can also be locked, so don't worry about that. You can do pretty much everything right there on that touchscreen. There's no need for an app, and that's perfect for me. Being a touchscreen also means that you don't have to worry about clicking, double clicking, or struggling to see the labels on the physical buttons, or diving deep into the menu to do things like change the function of that wheel on the side. It's all right there and it's super simple, plus it means that if you adjust those things on the fly while recording, it'll be much less likely to translate into your footage. The screen is also very responsive, it's really easy to use, and it's giving me absolutely no problems at all. There are also some physical buttons that are required on the AK4000 to jump into certain special follow modes, and they're definitely less often used follow modes, so it's not a big deal, but for somebody like me, again, who has a terrible memory, it's a little bit tricky to remember how to do what, and the buttons are not labeled all that clearly. So ease of setup and transportation is another big factor for me. I most often find myself rushed on shoots, and using 10 or 20 minutes to set up a gimbal or to pack it away is just not something that I can really afford to do. This is where the AK4500 and AK4000 both really shine and really fail in some different ways. I love that these can be built up and broken down from the pistol grip to an extended pistol grip to the ring grip really, really quickly and easily. The AK4500 even introduces a Manfrotto Arca Swiss hybrid plate, which has a kind of pop out Arca Swiss plate on it. So if you don't want to have to rebalance things every time you take off and put back on the camera, you don't have to. But you do also maintain the flexibility of using a Manfrotto standard plate. You even get this rear handle that attaches to the AK4500 to get a more comfortable grip for underslung mode, a lot like you've seen in a lot of recent gimbals, but this is removable and it's really quick and easy and secure, so it's very nice to have that actually built in and integrated into the design of the body. This being made by FeiyuTech themselves instead of a third party just makes it integrated into the gimbal a lot more nicely, and you do have tons of flexibility with what you mount on here. I have this part, which we'll talk about in just a minute, mounted on here now, but you could also use the carbon fiber extension rod or even the little mini tripod on here, so you have a lot of flexibility in how you use it. And of course it's great that it is removable, which is different from some of the other gimbals that have this kind of physical design in it. It's really easy to mount magic arms, monitors, even your phone on here. Plus both of these are compatible with a really awesome and little tiny follow focus unit, and the AK4500 has this extra little feature here which we're going to talk about soon. There's just a lot you can do with these gimbals. You can't deny that flexibility. It's just going to be super easy to use these in exactly the setup that you need for whatever situation you find yourself in. But there are so many pieces. I'm not gonna lie, these are kind of a pain to pack away. I honestly just keep them assembled most of the time and put them in between the seats of my car so that way they're not gonna fall down or get broken or have anything fall on them and crush them. I mean, it's not like they're necessarily hard to put away. It's all toolless, and in all honesty, it's pretty similar to a lot of the other gimbals. But I would have loved to see small little touches here, like a case that doesn't require you to completely reset the position of the arms when you put it back, a better case for the ring grip, better caps for the exposed ends of the gimbal when you take them apart, you know, just things like that. And on that note, why has no gimbal company made fine-tuned knobs where you can have a separate knob that you maybe push into kind of semi-lock the arms down in place when you're balancing your camera, and you can just turn them to get really fine-tuned adjustments, and then you can have a separate knob to fully lock it down when you get it. It would just make things so much easier instead of having to completely loosen that and do that awkward little push but don't push too hard type thing when you're trying to get those small little adjustments when you're balancing your camera. It just seems like something that somebody would have been able to do, and I'm surprised that I haven't seen it on any gimbal yet to this point. But anyway, the final point here on the ease of setup topic is that the AK4500 also introduced locks on all of the axes, independent locks, which makes it of course easy to throw into your bag without it flopping all over the place. But it also makes it really easy to get the gimbal balanced because you can lock off all of the axes except for the one that you're trying to balance, and it just makes it really easy to focus without having to do, again, that awkward kind of holding some arm while you're trying to balance the other one type move. Anyway, you can see that these are in some ways a mixed bag in terms of the things that I think make a really great gimbal, but for the most part, especially in the case of the AK4500, but also for the AK4000, both of these really cover a lot of bases. They're super flexible, they're relatively easy to use, the touchscreen interface is great, the stabilization is going to be on par with any other gimbal on the market, and the way that they react to your movement is going to make it very easy to get nice, smooth, and natural looking footage. I would love to be able to dial back that reactiveness a little bit further. I would love a little bit more simplicity in the way that these pack away, but again, they're super flexible, they're super modular, and those things make these very fun to use, but also a little bit overwhelming. Anyway, now we'll just talk about some of the remaining differences between these two gimbals again, so you can get a better idea of if the AK4500 is going to be something you need or if the AK4000 will do the trick. Most of the differences have already been covered more or less, things like the lack of locks on the AK4000, the additional rear grip for the AK4500, the pop-out combo quick release plate for the AK4500, and specs like the maximum payload. There are a few other small subtle differences, like the way the battery door works. There is a door under the screw-off cap, which is nice, so as you remove the mini tripod, for example, the screw-off cap won't accidentally come loose and let the batteries out while you've got the power on. The little spring latch on the AK4000 though does require you to push it locked when you close the door, but the AK4500 snaps into place by itself, which just makes that a little bit easier. The display on the touchscreen is very slightly different as well, although it works basically the same. While it is easy to use, some of the wording is slightly confusing, so I'd recommend skimming through the manual at least once. One of the biggest differences besides the obvious ones, like capacity locks in the rear grip, is the magic wand. You can put this onto that rear grip for the AK4500 itself, and you can control the gimbal settings from here, as well as use things like that side wheel for moving the gimbal or controlling the wireless follow focus, although the interface is simpler than the standard grip and it's not a touchscreen. It has internal rechargeable batteries and it connects to the gimbal pretty easily, but again, browse through the manual really quickly once and you'll have a much more stress-free startup. What's possibly even cooler though is that you can remove this and use it for motion control from a distance. There's a phone clamp included that you can easily stick on top of this, and then with Wi-Fi you can monitor the view from your camera as you move around for the gimbal to mimic your motions. There are other basic videos which go more in depth to what this can do, and to be fully honest, for me it's a little bit more of a gimmick than something I would use on a regular basis, but it is really cool for those situations where you can use it, and it works pretty well with minimum delay. The AK4500 can also switch into portrait mode with the click of a button, not that I'll personally use it, but it can do it, and there's an automated inception mode as well. There are of course some little minor differences too, like the design of the side wheel, and while they both work very well, the resistance on the AK4500 is a little bit heavier, which may in cases make it a little bit easier to pull focus, for example. The mini tripod is also slightly different, and the one for the AK4000 actually has some screw threads in it, so if you wanted to attach something down here, you could do that, which is a pretty interesting way to attach something like an external monitor. So if you haven't gathered, I love both of these gimbals. They're super fun to use, they're super easy to use, and they do a great job at stabilizing your footage, and that's what's most important, isn't it? If you do have any remaining questions about either of these, let me know down in the comments below and I will do my best to get back to you. But if you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it if you'd like, I'd really appreciate that, and subscribe. As always, thank you for watching.